Olavo de Carvalho, a prominent Brazilian philosopher who lived from 1947 to 2022, passed away in January 2022, leaving behind an extensive philosophical legacy. Unfortunately, English translations of his work are not yet widely available. Carvalho's profound impact on political theory reshaped the political landscape of his homeland, Brazil. Much like Socrates and Plato, his ideas garnered both intense admiration and fierce opposition. In the realm of political thought, Carvalho's perspectives faced heavy criticism, leading to the formation of adversaries who persist in tarnishing his reputation. This ongoing opposition poses additional challenges for English speakers seeking to comprehend the true significance and breadth of his intellectual contributions. This discourse serves as an impartial endeavor to highlight the major achievements and tenets of Carvalho's philosophy. Its aim is not only to illuminate his ideas, but also to bridge the gap for English speakers, offering a clear understanding of his work amidst the obstacles posed by detractors. Moreover, it strives to extend the reach of Carvalho's philosophy out of the underdeveloped landscape of Brazilian intellectual discourse. In the words of Carvalho himself, "By temperament, I am somewhat refractory to the systematic and academic presentation of my thoughts, preferring the essayistic form. However, this does not mean that there is not in my work a very cohesive systematic background around a nucleus of very evident principles, whose varied application I exemplify in the approach to 1,001 problems suggested by circumstances." Before writing this essay, students of Carvalho thought the biggest challenge would be translating his philosophy into the language of Shakespeare. However, English was not the problem. The real issue was the essayistic nature of his production. Navigating the archipelago of works he left behind requires an understanding of cultural criticism. A philosopher usually has a cultural environment where he extracts the raw material of the world, and for Carvalho, this took the form of critique regarding society and its cultural productions. From ancient Greece to modern times, philosophers have engaged in this practice. As the most public part of his work, Carvalho's cultural criticism is his most well-known contribution, where he dissected the problems and vices of Brazilian and Western modern culture with unique insights and charming wit. Metaphysically speaking, cultural criticism is not the core of a philosophical system, but its edge, which touches mundane facts on a daily basis. It serves as fodder for the development of many philosophical intuitions. Carvalho's work on cultural criticism takes various forms, ranging from numerous essays to more formally structured books. He highlighted points such as the crisis of modern materialism, neo-skepticism, Gnosticism, and modern hedonism. Especially enlightening are his studies regarding the revolutionary mentality and the three grand blocks of the modern world. A supplementary chapter of this critique focuses on cognitive paralogism, a term he coined that was vastly adopted in Internet discussions. This displacement between individual experience and theoretical formulation is responsible for ideas that are contradicted by the concrete conditions upon which the individual depends. Importantly, Olavo was responsible for the revival of great Brazilian authors neglected amidst the ruin of Brazilian intellectualism, which is often overshadowed by political preoccupations. According to Carvalho, his philosophy is a restoration of the notion of conscience. He defined philosophy as the unity of knowledge on the unity of conscience, and vice versa. This was a reaction to schools that led to the situations described in his cultural criticism. His fundamental insight was that only individual consciousness is capable of knowledge. This involves distinguishing a subject as it relates to an object, and considering the historical existence of a conscious being. This gave rise to implications regarding human potentiality ingrained through the conscious. Carvalho stated that philosophy of consciousness does not signify a philosophy of solipsism, because consciousness is properly anti-solipsistic. It is the acknowledgement of the reality of one's actions in the world and one's own physical being as the author of those actions. The consequences of these explorations translated into multiple concepts such as knowledge by presence, the circle of latency, radical intuitionism, and the confession method.
The fundamental insight is that only individual consciousness is capable of knowledge. Distinguishing a subject as it relates to an object in the theory of knowledge is one aspect. On the other hand, we also need to consider the historical existence of a conscious being which, by definition, can only be individual. This gave rise to further implications, not of an external order, but rather as an inherent potentiality ingrained within human beings through consciousness. In the words of the philosopher himself, the philosophy of consciousness does not signify a philosophy of subjectivity, because consciousness is properly anti-solipsistic. It is the acknowledgement of the reality of my actions in the world and of my own physical being as the author of these actions. The consequences of these explorations of being and consciousness translate into multiple philosophical intellects with many recoined concepts such as knowledge by presence, circle of latency, radical intuitionism, amorous contemplation, confession method, self-evident intellection, symbolic dialectics, trauma of the emergence of reason, and principle of authorship. Each one of these could be a book of its own, largely above the scope of this brief expository essay.
One of his most significant contributions was the theory of the 12 layers of the personality, which was left largely incomplete due to his death. This framework describes the development of the psyche through 12 distinct layers, where each transition represents a transformation of the entire personality. Additionally, his theory of the Four Discourses, poetic, rhetorical, dialectical, and analytical, offered a systematic approach to human knowledge and language. In political theory, he argued that power is the possibility of action, specifically the ability to determine the actions of others.
The fundamental premise of Carvalho's political theory is that power is the possibility of action in a general sense. However, in politics, it has the strict meaning of the ability to determine the actions of others. In each civilization, 3 types of power tend to crystallize into specific groups, respectively associated with economic power, military power, intellectual or spiritual power. These powers can be exercised both actively and passively, and typologically, they correspond to the historical castes of producers, nobles, and priests. Nowadays, in respective order, they would be represented by Western globalism, the Russo-Chinese alliance, and Islam. The true agents of history. Olavo distinguishes who the true agents of history are. These are agents that transcend and outlast individual human lives, such as religious institutions, churches, dynastic families, the revolutionary movement, and secret societies.
He outlined the revolutionary mentality as a state of mind where an individual believes they can reshape society or human nature through political action, placing themselves above all judgment as a self-appointed agent of a better future. In the expansive scope of his work, Carvalho also authored commentaries on philosophers like Descartes, Machiavelli, and his compatriot Mario Ferreira dos Santos, whose superiority he acknowledged, despite Santos being less known due to copyright restrictions and concealed works.
Turba